Hello, welcome to Tech Talk with Steve. My name is Steve Cowles, product manager for AEM, and I'm your host. Today we're in episode 27 of Tech Talk with Steve. 3 ports, no waiting, 10 gig, multi-gig PoE, and cable testing. So we're going to be talking about the multiple RJ45 ports on your network service assistant or on your test pro when you're using the ADNet cable adapter with the certifier. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we'll get the units up here. So I've got on the left side here, I've used a VNC viewer, so it's virtual network computing for those of you that aren't aware of it. And I'm connected via USB into my NSA here, so we won't see the display on the NSA. We're going to use the NSA for our demonstrations today, but a lot of what you're seeing here is also going to be exactly the same when we're looking at doing these kind of tests with the Test Pro. The differentiator will be one of the tests that we're going to talk about today is going to be Certalite. That's the physical cable test. It's a qualification plus test done from a single-ended standpoint. If you're using Test Pro with the ADNSA adapter, or the ADNet cable adapter rather, you would have certification out of that channel port on the ADNet cable adapter. So I've got the Test Pro here as an example, and I'll take this adapter off so we can take a closer look at it. But the adapter on the NSA is also going to be very similar. So we've got 2 adapters here. The one on the right is the NSA. It's the AD-NSA-CH. That's the for channel. And then the one on the left is our ADNet cable adapter. So the one on the left is what we use in the Test Pro multifunction cable certification system. The one on the right is the one that's in my network service assistant right here. Very similar, and what you'll notice is that on one side of the adapter, there's a 2.5, 5 gig, 10 gig, and PoE testing port, as well as allows you to connect and do some network discovery. And then on the right port, you've got the channel connection there. So on the ADNet cable, it's going to be a certification for Cat 6A and below. And then on the AD-NSA, it's going to give you the Certalite channel for Cat 6A, Cat 6, and Cat 5E. Physically, they look very similar. You'll also notice that there is on the top of each of these, in addition to the pair of RJ45s, you've got a pair of banana jacks. That's for something different. That's for doing an external load test. We won't be covering that today. We're mainly going to focus on the RJ45s. So we've seen 2 RJ45s on this adapter. We mentioned 3 RJ45s in the title of this episode. So where is the 3rd RJ45? Well, if we look at the side of a Test Pro or an NSA, you'll see there is built into the unit an RJ45 Ethernet port just above your power charging port. So that's your 3rd RJ45 port. So we're going to cover all 3 of these, the different tests you can do based on which port you're using, and how that functionality is going to help you troubleshoot and test a wide variety of situations or applications. So I'm going to start out with the physical cable test, one that everybody's familiar with. You want to make sure you've pulled your cable in, or you're troubleshooting. You think you have an issue with the cable. You want to run a physical cable test. Now, if we're using the certifier, we're going to have 2 ends. We're going to have our main and our remote end. And with Test Pro, those are identical. They both give you the same detailed information on both ends. With NSA, one end is going to be one of these remote terminators, and then the other end is going to be the test unit itself. So, that's the big difference between the two, between the network service assistant and the Test Pro. So we're going to do a Certalite test. If we had the certifier hooked up, we'd be doing a channel certification test, Cat 6A channel or 5E or whatever you're testing for your channel. I'm set up to do a Cat 6A Certalite test. So I've got my remote terminator plugged into a port here, and behind this bulkhead here, I've got loops of cable that'll link 2 ports, and I've got a variety of wiring scenarios here, some not good, some good, and we're going to test these. So I've already connected here. I'm connected. The other end of this patch cord kind of loops around and comes into my channel Certalite port on the NSA. So this is our first test. We're going to look at doing a physical cable test. So if we click on the cable Certalite, we get a live wire map. We also get on the Test Pro, the certification tester, a live wire map when we have the main and remote at opposite ends of a link. You immediately get a wire map as soon as they're connected. The nice thing about having a live wire map is that you don't have to run an auto test to know that you have an issue with the cable. So right here, we see immediately we've got a short and we've got an open. If I click in the middle of my wire map, we'll do a quick diagnostic of this, the wire map, and it will display to us what is the distance to the short and what is the distance to the open. So roughly 14 meters or so to each of these. And that's going to tell me, here's the cord coming from the end of my tester here, from the test head. This issue is going to be at the other end of that link. If it was right here, it would show us more like 2 meters. So we know that that's at the other end. So I immediately know, which jack is going to be the suspect. Where's my problem going to be? And I'll take care of that. Now, one note, you'll notice that some of these displays scroll a little slowly. That is a function of the VNC that I mentioned earlier, how I'm projecting my LCD onto the computer screen. Normally, the LCD refreshes much more quickly when we see that. So now I'm going to plug into another link here. This one looks good. We'll go ahead and run a quick test. So this would be our physical cable test. I've already set up my project. In the interest of saving time, I just gave it a name for today's show. And we're running a Certalite Cat6a channel. And again, we're testing single-ended. It's not certification. This one failed, and we seem to have some issues. So we've got crosstalk and return loss problems here. So let's take a look at the details. And in our details tab, we can scroll down and we can look at, let's say we want to look at the crosstalk. We can look at the plot, and sure enough, we can see that it drops below the limit line. And again, the limit line, in case you're not familiar with it, when you're testing cable, the limit line is the pass-fail limit based on the standards. And of course, we're using TIA 1152A and the 568 standards that call out which test you're going to do and what those limits are. So if it falls below this line, it's going to fail. Now, the other important thing here is you want some distance between this limit line and where the test data is. So you want to see some space. You want to see clear space between the bottom end of these graphs here and where that red limit line is. That's called headroom. Headroom is important because it's a margin between what the limit is and what your cable is actually performing at. And when you have a good bit of headroom, if there are some issues with the cable, you're much more likely to be able to keep using that cable because you've got headroom that will keep it from bottoming out, if you will, against that limit line. So that's that headroom in a nutshell. So you can see the graph here, but when we're in the field, we want to know, okay, where is that crosstalk? So we're going to scroll down to the bottom, and this tool is also available in the certifier. You've got a return loss locator and a crosstalk locator here. So we'll look at the RL locator first, and I see I've got return loss, pretty decent spike here at my near end. So it's going to be right here at this patch cord. And then I can do the same thing if I want to look at the crosstalk. And I can see on crosstalk locator, I've got some crosstalk at the near end, right here, right at about that 2 meter mark. I've got some crosstalk mid-span in the cable. That's actually a kink in the cable that's produced this. And at the far end, we can see a huge crosstalk spike. And this is intentional. I did this when I terminated this, I untwisted the pair. So this is useful in the field. If you have a termination issue, you might see crosstalk exhibited this way. So these tools will allow you to actually pinpoint where along the cable that issue is. And then we could save this test if we wanted to use the failed test as a punch list. I'm just going to back out of it, and we'll just run another test real quick in here. And now we're in remote ID number 8, and I am using multiple remotes here. We do have remotes numbered 1 through 8. And then we'll go ahead and run another auto test here real quick. And this is going to hopefully be a good cable. If I've done my job right, it'll show up as a pass. And then we can save our test results. So this is the physical cable test port, and it did pass. I'm going to go ahead and click save. And I'm going to just go up here to number 5. We'll save an A005 out of my list. And then what I'm going to do is show you a couple more tools that you can use out of this RJ45. If we go into expert tools, you've got a tone generator built in here. So if you're using an inductive probe, you could be using a tempo probe or any number of RF type analog probes. You can go into tone generator and send tone down the wire. You've got ability to do a slow speed warble and a faster warble. So you've got 2 different tones to select. So if you need to trace out the cable, but additionally, you can do tracing out using these remote IDs. If you plug 8 of these in, in the panel. Say you're working by yourself, you can roam around, plug into the wall outlets, and check the remote ID number as well. The learn NVP and the length test you see here, they're kind of the opposite of one another. So learn NVP, if you have a known length of cable between 10 and 100 meters, you can determine what the NVP value is. For those not familiar with NVP, that's nominal velocity of propagation. It's essentially the speed limit of the copper. And the NVP number is going to be important for your length measurements. So especially when you're certifying and you need to fall within those limits, you definitely want to make sure you've got your NVP set correctly so that you know that your cable is not too long and you get accurate length measurements in your certification reports. The length test itself, if you know the NVP value already, you can input the NVP value and then measure length of an unknown piece of cable. So those are the functions that you would get out of that physical cable test port. So I'm going to hit the home button. We can hit the home button from any place, any menu we're in on the NSA or on the Test Pro for that matter, to get back to this home screen. And now I'm going to switch test modes. So again, I've got this same adapter in here. I'm just going to go ahead and unplug from my channel test port. And then I'm going to click this MultiGig to take me over to my MultiGig port. So it's just going to change the test setup. And then what I'll do is I will connect to a different link here. I will take my little remote out and I'm going to just run this right into that port. So what I've got here is I have a cord that's running from a, let me untangle this because it's making quite the mess. I'm running from a multi-gigabit switch into a PoE injector, and then from the PoE injector over this cord into this port on the patch panel to loop back over, and it comes into my unit here. So now I've got a 2.5 gig connection here. Here's another auto test that we can run out of this port. But before I show you that, I want to show you a quick PoE test. So let's say we're having an issue with PoE, or we need to confirm after installing our PSE that we're actually getting power to the endpoint. We can go in here and click the PoE tool. And we can select, right now I'm set for 90 watts of PoE, and I can see that I'm getting that. Here, 71.3 watts. This is the theoretical number that you will get on 100 meters of good working cable. So that number is the allocated power. It's what the switch is advertising it will give us. Good information, but we need to find out a little bit more. One of the things that you can do here, you can choose whether you want the 90 watt BT, the 30 watt AT, the 15.4 watt AF, or if you have UPoE, you can choose the 60 watt. We'll leave it set at 90. And what we want to find out, obviously we've got PoE on all 4 pairs. We see the class, the type, we see our voltage. And the most important one, the very first line, if you have a no here, you're not going to get any of this other information. So we're going to go ahead and hit this lightning bolt. That's our load test. And we're actually going to demand the load from the switch. We're demanding power from the switch, just like the NSA was a PoE device. We see here that we're getting 67.39 watts. So that is the power that we can actually get at the end point of this cable, not 71.3. This is useful for troubleshooting. Maybe you have a PoE device that's not functioning properly, excuse me, and you're trying to figure out what's causing the issue. You'll go out to that PoE device, you'll disconnect the PoE device from the link, you'll plug that cable that was connecting the PoE device into the top of your NSA or your Test Pro using the ADNet cable adapter, and you can run this test and determine if you're getting adequate power. We have a situation like this where we see that we're not getting adequate power. We would actually go back to the switch directly and plug into the switch to see if we can get the correct amount of power directly from the switch port. If it's not coming correctly from the switch port, maybe the switch port is not provisioned properly. Maybe the switch itself is suspect. There have actually been cases where I've been out in the field and seen cases where a user provided their own PoE switch, and they bought it online for about $100, and it's a 12-port 90-watt PoE switch. Any of you that have installed PoE switches know that $100 doesn't buy you much when it comes to PoE, and 90 watts was the aggregate power among all the ports. And what that means is that when you plug one device in, you're going to get adequate power. But as you start plugging more devices in, that 90 watts is shared between everything that's plugged into that switch. And now that power level drops. So there's a lot of things you can determine using a quick PoE test like this. The other possible suspect is the patch cord. If somebody breaks or loses a patch cord and replaces it, they're moving things around or whatever, they put a patch cord in. Potentially, if they just use some very cheap quality patch cord, it's going to have some high resistance, and that's going to be a problem as well. So those are things to look out for. And again, this is one of the tests that you can do from this port. So the other test, the first one that I pulled up here, this MultiGig test. I'm going to go ahead and run this, and I'll talk about it while it's running. This test will take a little longer than a certification or a Certalite test, but it's because it's doing more. What we're doing is we're connecting at 100 meg, we're connecting at 1 gig, making sure we can connect to those speeds. We're doing the same thing for 2.5 gig, 5 gig, and 10 gig. Now you can speed the test up if you don't need to test all those speeds. You can deselect whatever you don't want to test. While we're doing that, we're actually putting traffic on the wire. We're measuring the signal to noise ratio, and we're demanding PoE load all at the same time. So if PoE is present, we're going to do a PoE load test as part of this auto test. We're measuring signal to noise ratio. So basically we're comparing the level of the signal, the traffic that's on the line, with the noise. And you want a high number. Higher the number, the better when it comes to SNR. 3.4 is okay. I've got 10 gig here, 3.4. Really, it's going to be based on the typical, good working link in your specific network as to what this is. So the rule of thumb here for 10 gig, I wouldn't want to see anything less than 3 dB, but I would test some of my good known working cables. And if all of those were exhibiting 4 dB or 5 dB, I know that's my benchmark, and maybe I'll set my limit higher. And then if I have one that fails, I can take a closer look at it. And in this case, if we did suspect that we maybe want to take a closer look at this, we can drill down by pair and see what our signal to noise ratio is by pair. So this is a real world test, and this can be added to your physical cable test, whether it's certification on the Test Pro or the Certalite on the NSA. We can save this test just like we would any of our certification tests and provide that as additional value added to our customer to show them that everything on the network is working. And here we can see, we've got our 1 gig and 100 meg connected, and we've got our PoE results as well. And then we can go ahead and just save this test result, and it'll be part of our onboard test results that we can upload later into the PC software. So other things that we can do through this port, we can do network test in cloud. I'll show you that in a minute because we can actually also do some of that through the side port. And then the cloud is actually for uploading test results. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to disconnect from this higher multi-gig, and I'm going to connect a different network to my link here. So I've connected to a different network. We can see I've established a link. If I look at this, I can see I'm connected at 1 gig. I've also got PoE on this link, I believe. I will go ahead and click my PoE, and we'll see what level of PoE we've got. So here, this is a lower level of PoE. So I'm only showing 25.5 watts, even though I'm connected at 90. So I know that this is my 802.3 AT 30 watts. So if I wanted to test that and put a load on it, I could test it using this tool as well. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to disconnect from this multi-gig port, and we're going to talk about the third port. So a couple things are going to run from the third port, this base T, but I'm also going to show you the network test in cloud. So before we go to the side port, we'll just do network test in cloud. You can run that from this port that I'm connected to now, or you can run it through the side Ethernet port. We'll go to network tests. And again, this VNC is painting this screen slowly. It really paints much faster when you're actually using the LCD display on the unit. So we'll see here in a moment, we're going to start discovering devices. And we'll build a list of devices here that we're discovering. In the meantime, I'm going to click on this icon of my tester, and it will give me some information about the network to which I've connected. I can see the IP address I obtained. I see my DNS, my DHCP information. I can even look at the switch. We'll click on the switch detail button in the lower right, and we'll run a switch detail. And what this is going to do, it's going to query the switch, and it's going to bring back information about my managed switch that I've got here in the office. It's going to show me the name of the switch. It's going to show me the manufacturer and the model. So here we see the switch is Whopper Cheyenne Mountain. I see it's a Cisco SG250. I can see that I'm in port 7 and I'm on VLAN 1. Good troubleshooting tool. If you have a user who can't connect to a resource or they can't connect to the internet for whatever reason, hook up, disconnect them, at their device and plug into the tester and run this test, and you can actually see where they're hooked up. And maybe they're not supposed to be in port 7 and VLAN 1. Maybe they're supposed to be port 12 on VLAN 3, because VLAN 1 is a limited resource VLAN, maybe, just for instance. So you can do some of that kind of troubleshooting as well. We can see the port capabilities of this switch port. We can see the IP address information, MAC address information. So all this detail is available. Good troubleshooting tool, and good to make sure that you're connected to that correct switch port. So we'll go back to our discovery screen again, and we should see more devices starting to build. And I can see the discovered devices here, and I can see a list of these. I can bring them up by host name if I'd like. That information is available as well. I can click on any of these and go ahead and get more detail, like how far away it is from a network perspective, the network distance, which is the number of routers it goes through, operating system if it's advertised, those type of things. Other tools we've got built in here, you've got the ability to do ping and trace route. So we could ping Google, for instance. If we didn't like the numbers that we saw getting to Google, we could then do a trace route and see if the slowdown to Google is on our local network, or is it on an IP address that's outside of our responsibility, a different router outside the network, somewhere in the path between here and Google. Good troubleshooting tool. You've also got a TCP Connect tool here that you can actually connect to a TCP port and look at the delay on the TCP port. You've got the switch detail button here as well. VLAN discovery allows you to connect to a trunk port and see the various VLANs that are on that switch, and what percentage of traffic is on each of those based on the number of frames. And then there's a traffic generator that you've got in here as well. And with the Test Pro, the remote Test Pro will actually also do a traffic monitor function. These are also available in auto test, so you can run an auto test to get all this information into a saved report that you can also provide to your customers. So I'm going to go back to my home screen, and I'm going to switch ports here. And we're going to click on the base T test, which is going to utilize my side Ethernet port. And I'm going to connect to the side Ethernet port. It's going to see the switch. I'm going to run an auto test. And this looks very similar to the multi-gig test that we ran before, that we did the 2.5, the 5, and the 10 gig SNR values. This port is for running SNR values at 1 gig and below. So if you have a network that isn't using the multi-gig speeds, you want to do an SNR test at 1 gig and below, you can do that. Or if your network is using the multi-gig and the 1 gig, depending on what's connecting to it, you could also run that 1 gig SNR test here as well. Now, you can't do PoE through the side port. You would have to still use that top multi-gig port to do PoE. But this gives you the ability to do the SNR test for 1 gig and below. And we can see here, we've got 1 gig has a 8.6 and our 100 meg is 12.9. We look fine. We can look at detail by pair if we want. And again, we can save this just like we save any of our other tests. And again, we can also still connect I'll hit my home button to go back home. We can still go into this network test. And just like we did through the multi-gig port, we can connect to the network. Now, there is a wider switch compatibility through the multi-gig port. So definitely that's something that you want to typically use for this test, but it is available on the side Ethernet port. One other note about using the side Ethernet port, you do not have to have an adapter in the top of the unit. Or if you have something other than the copper adapter, if you have a fiber adapter, for instance, you can still use the side Ethernet port to run a copper SNR test if you need to. So that is available as well. So that will pretty much cover most of those ports. And again, once you've got these tests run, no matter which of these 3 ports you're using, you can upload them to your PC software. And I'm just going to do from device here. and do a real quick upload of these tests, and I'm going to pull them in. Now, this is going to pull in every test I've got on this unit. So I'm going to go to the project I created for today. And right here, we can see these reports that I ran, and we can pull up any of our tests. So if we look at our Certalite physical cable test, we can pull that up, and it will show us as soon as my PDF renders here. I'll drag it over from the other monitor, and we'll see that test report. So this is going to look very similar to what you're used to seeing in a certification report. But again, it's single-ended. So on the remote side of this, you won't see anything, but you still get all of these RF details. You get all these graphs. The only thing we don't do in the single-ended, there's not a TCL graph here because we don't test TCL in that. But the other tests that you could also pull up, looking at like the switch detail and all of that we did with the network type testing, you can see that level of detail as well. So all that is in that auto test. Gives you all that detail that we were just looking at. So again, that's the 3 different ports. We didn't talk anything about fiber. Both the Test Pro and the NSA have fiber capability as well. They also both have Wi-Fi capability with the addition of the Etamax USB Wi-Fi adapter. So as you can see, and I'm going to switch back to camera here now, and we'll you'll get to see me instead of the display. So as you can see, with the 3 different ports that you've got, whether you're using a network service assistant or you're using a Test Pro with the ADNet cable adapter, you've got a wide variety of testing capability that you can do. Now, interesting thing about the Test Pro, remember with the Test Pro, you've got 2 systems, a main and a remote. So you've got 2 handsets, and if you get the ADNet cable adapters, you get 2 of those in a set, and you can deploy the main and the remote both as main units to do your multi-gig Ethernet, to do your PoE, to do the network discovery, the ping, the trace route, all those things, and the Wi-Fi with the USB adapter. So with the Test Pro, you can actually have 2 testers for that type of testing. And again, you have to bring them back together. The main and the remote have to be used together when you're doing the physical cable test, the certification test. But all the other tests that we talked about, they can be deployed separately. And of course, the network service assistant is a single unit with the small remote terminator. The remote terminator is not used for anything but the Certalite physical cable test. Everything else you're testing directly into a network. So that gives you a good idea of what those 3 different ports are and the flexibility you've got in the multifunction platforms that we have, whether it's the network service assistant that you saw demonstrated today, or it is the Test Pro multifunction cable certification system. Both have all of that multifunction capability built in, and because of the versatility of the platform, as new technologies develop, as standards develop and increase, we have to look at new categories of cable. Those things, we're going to have more test adapters available. And again, those things will be accomplished, just by the addition of a new test adapter to accommodate that type of technology. So as we progress in the industry, as I mentioned, as the technologies advance, you're only going to be a test adapter away from doing whatever you need to do next. So that puts us just about at the bottom of our 30 minutes, and I don't see that we had any questions today. So one of the common questions I do get, however, when I talk about PoE is that I mention every time I talk about it, I talk about patch cords being problematic, and sometimes people want a little bit of extra explanation on that. So one of the things I will mention about patch cords and PoE. We talk about DC resistance, and another parameter is DC resistance on balance, where the pairs need to be balanced properly, each pair to every other pair. Also within the pair, the 2 conductors need to be balanced. Lower quality cabling and patch cords can be problematic in this area, and it can be detrimental to the PoE. And if somebody replaces a quality patch cord with a low quality patch cord, it can introduce that additional resistance or resistance on balance. And this is especially true if you have a short PoE run. For instance, if you have say a 7-meter patch cord and a 20-meter run of cabling, well, now your patch cord is almost 25% of the total channel when you connect that in there. So it can be problematic. And if that 25% has horrible resistance values, then that's how it'll impact it. And it'll do the same thing on long runs, just not as much as it does on the short runs. But it's always good to make sure that your cabling and your patch cords and everything else is compatible. And with that, I will go ahead and thank everybody for being with us today. We really appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next episode in 2 weeks from today. Thank you very much. Have a great day.